the Yoruba creation story, how the universe and human beings were created by the Orishas of the Yoruba pantheon. In the beginning, the universe consisted only of the sky above and the water and wild marshland below. Olorun, the god who possessed the most power and the greatest knowledge, ruled the sky, while Olokun ruled the endless water and the wild marshes. Olokun was content with her kingdom, even though it contained neither vegetation nor animals nor human beings. However, the young god, Obatala, was not satisfied. As he looked down from the sky, he said to himself, "The world below needs something of interest. Everything is water-soaked, and not one living thing enlivens the area. I must talk with Olorun and see what can be done to improve the situation." So Obatala said to Olorun, "Poor Olokun rules nothing but marshland, mist, and water. What she needs in her kingdom are mountains and valleys, forests and fields. All kinds of creatures and plants could live on the solid land." Olorun replied, "Of course, solid land would be far better than this endless expanse of water. But who can create it, and how?" "With your permission," Obatala replied, "I will create solid land. It is always my pleasure to give you whatever you wish." Olorun replied, "You know that I love you as my son." So Obatala went to the house of Olumila, the oldest son of Olorun, who had the gift of prophecy. Orunmila understood the secrets of existence, including fate and the future. Obatala said to Orunmila, "Your father has given me permission to create solid land where now nothing exists except endless water and wild marshlands. With your superior knowledge, can you teach me how to begin my project? I want to populate the earth with living beings who will raise up crops and build villages." Orunmila replied, "First, Obatala, you must acquire a chain of gold, long enough to reach from the sky above to the waters below. Then you must fill a snail shell with sand. Finally, you must place the shell, a white hen, a black cat, and a palm nut in a bag and carry them down as you climb down the chain to the wild marshland. This is how I advise you to begin your project." "Thank you, Orunmila," Obatala replied. "I will find the goldsmith and begin at once. I will bring you a chain of the length you need, if you will bring me the gold I need to fashion it. I do not think you will find enough gold in the sky, but ask each of the Orishas for whatever gold he or she possesses, and you may succeed, and I wish you well." Obatala approached the Orishas one by one. To each Orisha he said, "I plan to create solid land where now there is nothing but water and wild marshland. Then I will create all sorts of plants and creatures to live on that land. Before I can begin, I need the goldsmith to make me a chain that will reach from the sky above to the waters below. Will you contribute whatever gold you possess?" The Orishas were sympathetic to Obatala's cause. They gave him their gold, necklaces, bracelets, rings, and even gold dust. The goldsmith examined the gold Obatala had collected and said, "You cannot find more gold than this? This will not be enough." "It is the best I can do," Obatala replied. "I have asked every Orisha in the sky, and each has given me whatever he or she owned. Make a chain as long as you can, with a hook on one end." When the chain was ready, Orunmila accompanied Obatala while he hooked one end of the chain to the edge of the sky and lowered the rest of it toward the waters far below. Orunmila gave Obatala the sand-filled snail shell, the white hen, the black cat, and the palm nut. One by one, Obatala put them into a bag, which he slung over his shoulder. Then he said farewell to Orunmila and began to climb down the golden chain. Obatala climbed lower and lower and lower. When he was only halfway, he saw he was leaving the world of light and entering the world of twilight. Again he climbed lower and lower and lower. As he reached the end of the chain, he could feel the mist rising cool and wet on him, and hear the splashing of waves as they crashed upon the ocean. But he could see that he was still far above the ocean. "I cannot jump from here," he thought. "The distance is so great that I will drown." Then, from the sky far above, Orunmila called, "Obatala, use the sand in your snail shell." Obatala reached into his bag at his side, withdrew the snail's shell, and poured the sand on the waters below. No sooner than he had finished, when Orunmila called out, "Obatala, free the white hen." Obatala reached into the bag at his side, threw the white hen, and dropped it into the water where he had poured the sand. The hen fluttered down, landing upon the sandy waters, and immediately began to scatter the sand by scratching at it. Wherever the sand fell, it formed dry land. The large piles of sand became hills, while the smaller piles became valleys. Obatala let go of the gold chain and jumped to the earth. He named the place where he lived Epha. He walked with pleasure upon the solid land that he had created. The earth now extended further in all directions than his eyes could see. It was completely devoid of life, but this was just the beginning. Obatala dug a hole in the dry ground and buried his palm nut seed in the soil. Immediately a palm tree emerged and grew to its full height. The mature tree dropped its nuts on the land, and they also quickly grew to maturity. Obatala built himself a house of bark and a thatched roof with palm leaves. He then settled down to start life in Epha with his black cat for company. Olorun wished to know how Obatala was progressing with his plan, so he sent his servant, the chameleon, down the golden chain to find out. When the lizard arrived, Obatala said to him, "Tell Olorun, ruler of the sky, that I am pleased with the land I have created and the vegetation I have planted. But it is always twilight here. I miss the brightness of the sky." When the chameleon gave Obatala's message to Olorun, the ruler of the sky smiled and said, "For you, Obatala, I will create the sun." Once Olorun tossed the sun into the sky, it shed light and warmth upon the Epha as it moved across the sky on its daily journey. Days passed, and then months. Obatala continued to live on the earth that he had created, with only his black cat for company. Then one day he said to himself, "I love my cat, but his companionship does not satisfy me. I would be happier if creatures more like myself could live in Epha with me. Let me see what I can do." Obatala began to dig in the soil. He found the particles held together in his hand, for the substance he dug up was clay. He laughed as he shaped little figures just like himself. One by one he finished them and set them aside to dry. Obatala worked on, so enthusiastically that he was not aware of how tired and thirsty he was. Finally, his fatigue overcame him. "What I need is some wine to drink," he thought. Obatala placed his last clay figure upon the ground and went off to make palm wine from the juice of the palm tree. Obatala then drank bowl after bowl of the fermented palm juice, for he was very thirsty. He did not realize, but the wine made him very drunk. When Obatala returned to his task of making clay figures, fingers were clumsy now. The figures he created were no longer perfect. Some had arms that were far too short, some had legs of uneven length, and some had backs that were curved. Obatala was too drunk to notice the differences. He continued to fashion one figure after another. In time, he was satisfied with the number of clay figures he had created. Obatala then called out to the ruler of the sky, "Hear me, Olorun, you who are like a father to me. I have created figures out of clay, but only you can breathe life into them and make them into living people. I ask you to do this for me so that I can have human companions in Epha." So it came to pass that Olorun breathed life into the figures Obatala had created, and they became active, thinking human beings. When they noticed Obatala's house, they fashioned houses for themselves and placed them nearby. Thus they created the first Yoruba village in Epha, where there had been only a solitary home. When the effects of the palm wine wore off, Obatala realized that the creatures he had fashioned while he was drunk were imperfect. With a sad heart, he announced, "I promise I will never drink palm wine again. Moreover, I will dedicate myself to protecting all the people who have suffered from my drunkenness." And Obatala thus became the protector of all who were born deformed. The people prospered, and the Yoruba village of Epha grew into a city. Iron did not exist, so Obatala gave his people copper knives and wooden hoe to use as tools, and they cleared the land and began to raise grain and yams. Obatala eventually tired of ruling the city of Epha, so he climbed into the golden chain and returned to his home in the sky. Thereafter, he divided his time between his home in the sky and his home in the Yoruba city. The Orisha never tired of hearing Obatala describe the city that he had created on earth. Many of them were so fascinated with what they heard about Epha, they decided to leave their sky homes and live among the human beings on earth. As they prepared to leave, the ruler of the sky counseled them. "Remember," Olorun said, "you will have obligations to the humans among whom you live in Epha. You must listen to their prayers and protect them. I will give each of you a specific task to fulfill while you are living there." Not every Orisha, however, was pleased with Obatala's success on Epha. Obatala had not consulted the goddess Olokun, who was ruler of the sea, when he created solid land and a city in her kingdom. As the ruler of the sea watched the great sky god usurp her power and rule a large part of her kingdom, she became angrier and angrier. Finally, she conceived a plan that would avenge Obatala's insult to her honor. Olokun waited until Obatala had returned to his home in the sky. Then she summoned the great waves of her vast ocean and sent them surging across the land that Obatala had created. One after another, the waves flooded the earth until water once again flowed as far as the eye could see, and only marshland existed amidst the waves of ocean. Whole groves of palm trees became uprooted and floated away. Yams rotted and washed like dead fish across the surface of the sea. People drowned in their fields, in their groves, and in their homes. And those who remained alive fled to the hills and cried out to Obatala for help. But he could not hear them over the roaring of the waves, so far below him. So they sought the Orisha Ishu, who was living among them. They knew that he could carry messages to Obatala and Olorun. Please return to the kingdom of the sky, they pleaded, and tell the great Orishas of the disastrous flood that is destroying us. Ishu replied, you must send a sacrifice along with your message if you want one of the great sky gods to listen to you. The people sacrificed a goat to Obatala and said, we send this goat as food for Obatala. That is not enough, Ishu replied. I too deserve a gift for the service I am performing for you. When the people had sacrificed accordingly, Ishu climbed the golden chain and told Obatala how Olokun had flooded Epha and the rest of the earth. Obatala did not know how to deal with Olokun, so he asked Olorun for advice. Olorun replied, you rest here in the sky while I go down to Epha. I can make the waters withdraw and the land come forth once again. So it came to pass that Olorun climbed down the golden chain to the waters that covered Epha and the earth. Using his special knowledge, he caused the powers of the waves to wane and the waters to retreat. Once the waters had subsided, he dried up the marshland and put an end to Olokun's attempt to recover the area she had lost to Obatala. The people who survived greeted Olorun as their hero and pleaded with him to stay and protect them. But Olorun had no desire to remain in Epha. He agreed to stay long enough to teach the Orishas and the humans who lived here how to tell the future so they could begin to control the forces they could not see. Once he had done so, Olorun returned to his home in the sky. But like Obatala, he often climbed down the golden chain to see how life was progressing in Epha. The ruler of the sea made one final attempt to remain the equal of the ruler of the sky. Olokun was an excellent weaver of cloth. She possessed equal skill in dyeing the fabrics she had woven. So the ruler of the sea sent a message to Olorun, ruler of the sky, challenging him to a weaving contest. Olorun said to himself, Olokun is a far better weaver than I am. However, I cannot give her the satisfaction of knowing that she is superior to me in anything. If I do, she will exert her powers in other ways as well, and that will disrupt the order that now exists throughout the universe. Somehow I must appear to accept her challenge and yet avoid participating in her contest. Now how can I do this? Olorun thought and thought. Suddenly his eyes sparkled. With a smile he summoned the messenger, the chameleon, to his side. Go before Olokun, ruler of the sea, he ordered, with this message. The ruler of the sky greets the ruler of the sea. He asks you to display to his messenger samples of the cloth that you have woven. Let the chameleon judge your skill. If your cloth is as beautiful as you say, then the ruler of the sky will compete with you in a contest as you have suggested. The chameleon climbed down the golden chain and gave the goddess Olorun's message. Olokun was happy to oblige Olorun's request. She put on a bright green skirt, and to her amazement, the chameleon turned a beautiful shade of bright green. She next put on a bright orange skirt, and to her amazement, the chameleon turned a beautiful shade of bright orange. She then put on a bright red skirt, and to her amazement, the chameleon turned a beautiful shade of bright red. One by one, the goddess Olokun put on skirts of various bright colors, and each time the chameleon turned into that particular color that she was wearing. Finally, Olokun gave up. The goddess said to herself, if someone as ordinary as Olorun's messenger can duplicate the bright colors of my finest fabrics, how can I hope to compete against the greatest of the gods? She said to the chameleon, tell your master that the ruler of the sea sends her greetings to the ruler of the sky. Tell him that I acknowledge his superiority in weaving and all other pursuits as well. Olorun is indeed the greatest of the Orishas. So it came to pass that peace returned between the ruler of the sky and the ruler of the sea. And in that moment, peace was restored into the order of the universe.